driving.
This doesn't look good. I mean, here we are riding around this guy. He's flatlander drives in the middle of the road. Come on, we're switching places.
Well, this is just rude. Welcome back to the On the Road with Danny and Robert show with the Kentucky Valley Educational Cooperative. Of course, I'm here with my good friend Danny Vance, but we have two special guests today. We have Kim Surgett and Andrew Castle, and they're going to be talking to us about something as we ride around very important about the 2020 census that's coming up.
Okay, we're here with Kim and Andrew again. We're getting ready to take a little trip through Hazard, just outside of Hazard, and talk about the census on our road trip today. Tell us a little bit about the census and how it applies to our area and what's going on with it, and just try to help our people understand.
Well, I think one thing about the census is that's something that it's actually in the Constitution. It's part of Article 1, which basically establishes the idea that every 10 years Congress will take account of the people that are in the United States. And it literally is just that, it's just a count. So since 1790, every 10 years we've taken we've done an enumeration, basically, as a good way to look at that, of the people who live in the United States, because the whole idea there is that we've got a set budget. We have a set amount of money. So when you count the people that are in your country, then you know how to divvy that money out.
So this is a 10-year cycle.
10-year cycle.
And let's say that there's a family in one of these hollers. We're getting ready to kind of go up a holler here in Eastern Kentucky. And not degrading hollers. We love hollers. That's what we are.
That's who we are, yeah, absolutely.
And but let's say that a person in a holler up here, or even in town right here for that matter, has 4 kids that they don't report. That's $48,000 per year that the state's losing for funding.
And you had to, and sometimes like the most underreported group is the age group between birth and 5 years, because a lot of times, because unless you're absolutely actively using the roads or the schools, that sometimes when people are filling out the census, they don't really think of those tiny children, those newborns and things like that, as people. You know, I mean, they know they're people, but they don't really kind of count them because they're not out there using all this stuff and that kind of thing. But they don't take into consideration that if you have a child and whoever lives in your house on April 1st, okay, that is who is counted on the census. Like, one thing people don't realize, if you have a relative that's living with you April 1st and that relative passes away in the middle of May, whoever is living in your house on April 1st is who you count in that census.
Why do you find that people don't report these to the census?
I think what happens, and it's that same premise like you were talking about just a second ago, like, you know, we live very privately and we're very private people in this region. I mean, and it's not because we have anything to hide, it's our culture.
Right.
And it's because we believe in letting people have their space, we have our space, and we don't really, you know, kind of cross over that. And I think there's also this component that sometimes, and I think people across America kind of have this attitude of when the government comes around, they're coming around to be nosy for a reason. Well, the only reason for being quote unquote nosy in this case is literally just counting people. All of the information that is taken in is protected for 72 years. Yeah, people don't realize that once that information goes into the census report and once it's sent on to Washington, no one, not Congress, not the president, no one can access that information for the purpose of, you know, investigating for a crime or anything. And I don't mean to say that people around here are involved in that kind of stuff. I'm just saying they can't come there to investigate to see who lives there and how much money they're drawing and stuff like that. Right. They can't do anything like that. They literally can only know who lives there, how much they make, and they put that in the census, but that information is protected for 72 years.
So what you're saying is they can only release the statistics.
That's it.
But nothing
right.
Names, that sort of thing. It's all it's kept private within the census.
Exactly. Like for instance, you know, and you know, like, okay, let's look at a holler where you have a holler that's made up mostly of like family members, and there's about 70 people that live up that holler. Okay, that holler. So what happens is that those 70 people need to be counted, because that holler that they live in, you know, by all chances, is probably a public road. So if those 70 people don't all get counted, then in about 8 years, when that road is in tremendous disrepair, and you know, and that's those 70 people that live up there can't pull their money together to pave it, but it's a public road anyway, so they shouldn't. So, but now the money that would have been set aside to fix that road, because there's 70 people that depend upon it, that now is not going to be tended to, because those, not all of them are recorded. Like, for instance, they might say, well, we're just going to make sure, like the ones in these houses right here, they may not even realize that there's some houses that are hitting up in the driveway or whatever it may be.
So the size and the quality of the road may be different.
Yeah.
It might not match the needs of the population.
Exactly. And so that's why it's so important that we count these people, because, every single person does count. And just like I said, elderly, sometimes because that person doesn't go out and about and work and that kind of thing, you might have somebody that is bedridden. The roads, the census. And like, people don't realize what reporting on the census does for your community in general. For instance, in a couple of years, when businesses start looking at different areas where they want to open up new businesses, they go to the census, they see how many people live in an area, and most importantly, what the average income is for that area. So that's one reason why when they come in and they ask you those questions, they don't ask you how much you make, because they're going to contact another government agency to come investigate you. They're going to ask you how much you make, because they kind of need to know, the value of a region. And that's the only reason that they're doing it. So for instance, when they look here in this area, if we're underreported, which means that we're not getting credit for all the money that we need, then what ends up happening is they might look here and say, well, we're not going to bring a Macy's or a Dillard's. I don't even know if they have Dillard's anymore, but a Belk or whatever to the area, because they can't support that business financially. So those businesses will not come here.
We have so many small, struggling communities in Eastern Kentucky. I would dare say that the census is maybe more important for us than a lot of other regions in the country.
I think, and exactly.
We have to have an accurate count here.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing that, like, we're going to these areas, and the thing is, there's nothing wrong with the way that we live in this region. There's nothing wrong with the fact that we have, because actually
We are who we are.
That's exactly, and I think our hollers, absolutely, and our hollers are no different than people's streets that they live in the cities. It's just, we live in a rural area, so we have mountains and that kind of thing.
That's why we're kind of doing this on the road today, and we're going to go up a little holler. We're going on a main road out of Hazard now, but to kind of give an idea of what a census person who's coming to visit you, what they're going to deal with, they may decide not to go up this holler or whatever.
Yeah. But I think one thing about the census too that people don't realize is that healthcare is deeply impacted by the census. When you think about how clinics and hospitals are funded, that is based on the population for that region.
And schools.
So when people think about what we need in our area, like we always complain that our schools don't have this and our schools don't have that. But if people don't realize that there are students that are sitting in that building that have not been counted, like for instance, okay, let's say like this year's 2020, and you've got a 3-year-old that's living in your house and you don't think to put them on the census. In 5 years, when they're sitting in that classroom, they have not been accounted for in 2020. So they're sitting in a classroom in 2025 that desperately needs technology, but that technology cannot be purchased because that class was underreported.
Right. So a lot of times we feel like that we're underfunded for many reasons, and a lot of times we assume it's one thing or the other, when in actuality it could be highly regarded relying on the census.
Yeah, well, it does.
Look how much money we possibly are losing, and for our area that we need the money as bad as anybody does.
We do. Considering the impact on schools because we are underreported, one thing that Andrew has looked at with the student centers is how to address that. Tell Danny about that program.
So what we've encouraged our student senators to do, they're in every high school. We have 2 student senators in every high school.
It's good. It's a good honor for those students too, isn't it?
Yeah, and they're a good bunch of kids. So what they've all done is they've developed a plan, sort of a localized plan of things they can do within their school and within their community to sort of increase participation in the census. For example, some are doing things, they've set up little booths at basketball games to pass out information and flyers. Some schools and some of the principals, they've really gotten on board with this. They're actually setting up, because for the first time, you can actually take the census online this year. Is that correct?
You can.
So what they're doing is they're setting up computers in their lobbies and certain places in the school, so folks can come in if they don't have access at home or a fast enough computer, who knows, they can actually take the census at the school.
That's a great idea.
How long does it take, by the way, Kim, to fill out the paperwork?
Oh my God, maybe 5 minutes. It literally, because all you're doing is going in and you enter the name, the age, the gender, and if they have an occupation, and that's pretty much it, per person that lives in your household. And one thing, like speaking of which, like how we have these kids are also aware of the populations that's in their schools. Like for instance, we have grandparents that are raising their grandchildren, and sometimes grandparents will say, well, they're not really my child, so I really shouldn't report them. No, if they're living in your house on April 1st,
Right.
they are the person that you report.
Has it got anything to do with taxes, who claims dependents or anything like that? Has that got anything to do with this?
It's who lives in that house.
Who lives in the house?
Yeah, and that's why this is only an enumeration. This is just a numbering of the people. Is pretty much, the way that we have to look at it.
Uh-huh.
And one thing I was noticing, like while you two were talking, and and we're driving around, and we've only gone as far as we've gone up this way, you realize that, and that's one thing too I want to bring up about the census workers who do this. Many times when people think of census workers, they're thinking federal workers. Well, the beauty of this, especially in our region, census workers are actually people who are from that community, that they hire people locally. So when somebody pulls up in your driveway, there's a good chance that you'll know them, or at least they'll know, where you live, and they know like the people that are in your area. So there's going to be some kind of familiarity there. It's not somebody coming in from like another state, and they're coming in being nosy and that kind of thing.
Bump in the road.
Student senators.
Yeah.
Something else they did is back in the fall, a lot of our student senators attended a training held by some folks from Washington who work with the census, and they trained our students on how to create materials that would sort of help them get the word out about the census and maybe increase participation in the census. And it was great training. They enjoyed it.
Yeah, and I think the thing that was neat about that Create-a-thon that they did with the Census Bureau is it gave them a chance to really look objectively and subjectively at who lives in their schools, because we have kids who that you have no idea where they go home. That's one reason too, I think, that bus drivers are going to be really good people that the student senate kids are going to contact and say, how can we get information to this to this area and that kind of thing, because nobody knows better than a bus driver where kids live. But when you think about the census, I think for us, I think a student senate member, as a matter of fact, Andrew, he and I were there when this kid said this. He said we have to look at the census not as a weapon, because it's not going to be something that's used against our region. It's actually a tool.
Right.
And I thought that was and that came from a student. That came from, a youth in our community, and they recognize the power of the census and the fact that it's not a weapon. It's not something that comes in and gives the government power.
Right.
In reality, it gives us power.
And listening to what you're saying, I believe it'd be almost safe to say that this one aspect right here of our area cost us more money than any other thing we could think of. And it's something that doesn't have to happen. It's just like if everybody just reports who's lived in their household.
And that's it.
And it's not going to hurt them in any way. They're not going to jail. They're not going to take your kids. You're not going to be taxed extra. It's just it's a money that's generated to help our community.
You're exactly right what you just said. It can be the number one source of funds coming into the community, or it can be the number one source of funds being drained. Film came about how the statistical information is used. Businesses look at that, right?
Yeah.
Even small, gas stations or phone companies.
Possible industry maybe in the area.
Definitely industry. Like for instance, when you take into consideration a factory that has to employ 350 people right off the bat, okay? When they look at the census, if they see a community that only has 500 or 800 living in it, then they are not going to come there, because the reality is there is no way to hire, because they know that that's made up of 2-year-olds, 8-year-olds, 15-year-olds that they can't necessarily hire to work at. And so they'll look to those statistics and say, well, we can't go there, but look, here's this community that's 3 hours away that has 15,000 people that live there. That's where we're going to go.
And then the same applies for small business.
It does. It really, and with small business, then you're looking at funding for small business loans. So they will allot so much money to an area for small business loans based on the account for the census. So when you take all of that money and you think of all that's just kind of laying out there. And another thing, we have to look at representation in Congress. That is determined by the number of people in your community. Like statewide, they will look at us and they'll determine whether or not we're going to lose a representative in the legislature, in the state legislature alone. They look at population. And then when you look at the overall population, the last thing that we need to do in Kentucky, because we're one of those states that if you want to feel underrepresented, especially on the federal and state level, then yeah, we've got a real problem if all of our people are not counted. Because if, you know, they look at it like this: if you don't have a lot of people living there, then why do you need 2 or 3 senators?
It's the first day folks can actually start filling out the paperwork, or doing it online.
Well, April 1st is Census Day. That's when the whole thing starts rolling. And then you have from April 1st through the middle of May to self-report.
We're nearing our destination. I appreciate all the information. Wow, at the insight that you've given people that I didn't know. And, you really helped me understand
That's
the process a lot better. And
that's what this
hopefully
is all about.
Other people watching the video can too.
And I think the big thing is you guys doing this to really get it out there so people know. I mean, it's incredibly important. It's going to make a big impact on our community.
That's great. I appreciate it. And thank you both.
Thank you.